Welcome and thank you all for joining us for this very special series of the Crexi Podcast, an insider's look at all things commercial real estate. I'm Shanti Ryle, Director of Content at Crexi, and this is the Women of Influence series, delivering next-level insights and expertise live from GlobeSt's Women of Influence conference. And today we are thrilled to sit down with Hannah Miet. A little bit about our guest. Hannah is an award-winning, Forrester-certified B2B marketer with over 15 years of experience. She helps real estate, finance, and tech leaders cut through the noise and grow their businesses by marketing their expertise through messaging, positioning, thought leadership-focused content marketing, you are speaking my language, girl, and unmatched industry experience. Hannah formed Hannah Miet Consulting in 2022 after leading content in-house for Fortune 100 companies and agencies. Before that, she was a veteran business journalist and the founding Los Angeles editor of The Real Deal, which she expanded to the West Coast. Ooh! GlobeSt named her a 2024 Women of Influence in Marketing and Communications. Congratulations
Thank
again
you.
For her work over the course of a decade in commercial real estate. Hannah Miet Consulting is a solopreneur-led micro-agency built on Hannah's expertise, and unlike larger agencies that staff client projects with junior employees, Hannah leads every single project, leveraging a network of qualified partners for larger scopes. Hannah, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Oh my gosh, we're so happy to have you here. As a fellow content marketer, we're going to have so much to talk about.
I think we will.
Yes, I'm very, very excited. But before we dive into all the nuts and bolts of everything we'll get to today, I would love to know more about your story, getting started in marketing, and then how the heck you got into commercial real estate in the first place, because they're pretty disparate industries. So I'd love to hear your story in your own words.
Yeah, absolutely. I got into commercial real estate first as a journalist.
Mm-hmm.
I'm from New York, and I've been in LA for the past 11 years.
Mm-hmm.
I moved to LA and didn't have much of a plan.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of those, I'm young, I'm doing this journeys.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I'd already gone to journalism grad school and was working on a couple of different varied beats in New York before I moved. But the first job available was at a business journal, the Los Angeles Business Journal. And I was a news editor and basically started feeling out, like, what's the beat that I want to take over when it's available?
Yeah.
And the more I looked into commercial real estate, the more interesting it seemed. Like, it touches everything. It's, you can't really do much in life without occupying space of some kind.
Yeah, it's tangible.
It's tangible. It impacts the way that we live in every facet. So I grew more interested in it. And when the former head of real estate reporting left, I threw my hat in for that job. And so that's how I started. And then The Real Deal recruited me to launch their West Coast wing, which was really fun.
So cool. I read The Real Deal quite a bit, so very familiar with what you've set up.
It's funny to be in, I feel like we're in this nexus of commercial real estate media at this conference, where there's so many different people that have, GlobeSt's obviously.
Yeah.
There's a touch point of almost every media outlet that touches our industry, including this podcast.
Yeah, so. I know. We're just a little guy hanging out over here, but it's all the same thing. I think commercial real estate, it's all about, getting the deals done. It's about, generating income of a property. It's building new spaces, building communities, helping businesses build what they build.
Yes.
But, I think sometimes marketing for that stuff, or even journalism around commercial real estate, sometimes can get reduced to just here are the numbers that happened today. So I'm curious, when you were editor at The Real Deal, how did you go about setting up your coverage? What kind of stories were most interesting to you and the team? Why? And, how did you think about focusing on the commercial real estate space from a journalist's perspective?
Yeah, it was a little bit of a collaboration. At that point, The Real Deal had expanded to Miami, had a pretty awesome wing there, and LA was the first foray into the West Coast. And so there was some guidelines from the New York team, but they also gave me a ton of leeway in terms of what I thought was important. And I think approach was probably where I found the distinction to be the biggest, because Los Angeles compared to New York, even
different ball games.
It's a completely different ball game. It's
Yeah.
a small world. I joke with a friend, it's like if I meet someone at a conference, if they're from LA, we probably have 10 people in common at minimum.
Yep.
And so, there's a fun kind of, like the way that the real deal New York is a little bit gossipy, and that's kind of, its flair and it's fun. I wanted to veer away from that a little bit because I knew how small the LA market was, and that we'd need to be really focused on building community and not burning bridges wherever possible while still reporting the facts.
Yeah.
So that was kind of, we did basically first was just launching the website and then growing a small team, which was so much fun.
Yeah.
And I'm still in touch with Natalie Hoberman was the first hire. And she's actually also in marketing now as a solopreneur. So we've been
it happens
partnering.
that way sometimes.
It totally does. But yeah, basically the reason I got interested in marketing came out of just launching a brand in a new market and finding where I was excited was around the community building, starting an event series in collaboration with sales, that kind of stuff was getting me going.
Yeah.
And just, I remember a friend of mine setting up a meeting at some of the major brokerages for me to just go and explain what we were doing, explain to people who were scared about the gossipy side, how I was approaching it differently.
Yeah.
And I loved that stuff. So after a few years of that, it's like, okay, I think I want a job in marketing.
Yeah. And before I follow you there to marketing, I want to touch on a couple of things I heard you say.
Please.
Which is, first of all, you were very conscious about how you wanted to build your team and what your team did, which I think is very, indicative of you being true to values. But also, I can tell you put a lot of thought into it. So I would love to know, especially for women in this industry, when they find themselves in leadership role, there's not a lot of example to look to. So I'm curious, how did you think about, building the team that you put together? What was most important to you in the people that you did bring on? What was most important from a values perspective? You mentioned being very community minded and not giving into the gossipiness. But yeah, I'd love to learn more about just how you thought from a leadership perspective about putting this all together.
That's such a great question. And I'll first caveat is that I think I learned a lot in that process. And
absolutely.
Building, right now, my company, as you mentioned in the intro, and I appreciate, is it's me, an assistant, and third-party partners that are experts in what they do specifically, whether that's performance marketing or email marketing. So I'm kind of back in that zone of, for my very small team, how do I create, positive culture and what are my values? I think I'm more thoughtful about it now because of that experience and going through it. So what I'm going to say is of course I have a lot of values I can project into the past.
Yeah.
One thing that I was looking for at the time that I met Natalie was someone who was really entrepreneurial, because even though the Real Deal had been established for a while, this was a completely new market, a new style, and to be entrepreneurial, that you're not just writing a story, you're not just reporting a story and trying to find facts, but you're building our presence in a market.
Yeah, it's business development. It's
business
brand advocacy. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. And I don't know how much I understood that going in. I think that became clear to me once I was doing it, and once I realized that the hurdles to being a new publication in a new market, when there's a reputation that some people know, some people don't even know, and there's a established media landscape.
True.
So that was really important. And then someone obviously who could write well and is good with people.
Yeah.
I think so much of journalism and even content marketing is having a high emotional EQ and being able to navigate situations, especially as a journalist. It's a little bit easier on the brand marketing side, but as a journalist, you get angry calls sometimes. You report on a lawsuit. It's public information, but people don't want it disseminated further.
Sure.
So emotional intelligence was a huge one, and just thoughtfulness. I love working with people who are thoughtful and compassionate.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love working with women too.
Yes. gotta lift each other up. That's what so much of this conference is about. And like I was saying before we started recording, it's just so cool to see all these women being so giving and so intelligent and just like really knowing their stuff. Very inspiring.
Goodness, yes.
So pivoting a little bit into the next phase of your career, marketing, and we can also pull, I think, from building what you built at The Real Deal and your work in journalism. But I'd love to dive into, commercial real estate is still very male driven, very much older generation driven. I'd love to know, either some early lessons that you think really helped set you up for success, or alternatively, maybe some challenges you faced in your career that either, course corrected you and pointed you towards better opportunities maybe, or just helped you really grow when you had to figure out how to overcome those obstacles. Can you share a story that comes to mind?
Totally. I mean, in terms of obstacles, I tend to think of this one story just because it was so early in my marketing career. I had just transitioned into a company out of The Real Deal, and it's a little complicated in that I was working in a team that was based out of one city. It was a global team, but then I also would go into the office on occasion in LA, and the rest of the time I was remote. So I didn't have here's Hannah, and she is, going to be doing this globally, like on a global team covering these locations. So when I would walk into the office, no one knew who I was. And the first day that I walked in, I had my little card to scan. But I walked in and the head of a pretty big function in that company was sitting around with a team of all male young brokers. And they saw me come in from afar, and I could just see him looking at me. And I was dressed kind of like a creative person dresses, like just a little bright, a little bit not commercial real estate.
Yeah. A pop of color.
A pop of color, one might say, yes. It was funny to see, yesterday, a whole group of women dressed like that.
It was so fun. It was so much fun.
But basically, he said, who the fuck are you?
Just that?
Out loud as I was approaching. And, this young team of, brokers to be, these young guys just started laughing that he said it, and I was I think if that happened now, I'd have a smart comeback maybe. But I was so new to the situation and the environment, and as a journalist, I think it's not that you don't experience the gender dynamics. I would go to conferences and they would be 95% male sometimes, but you also have a little bit of power as a journalist, and so people want you to have a positive impression of them. So coming into a marketing role that, first of all, was, for regions that were much bigger than just this one market that I happened to live in and want to meet people in the office in, how to navigate that. I just was sort of deer in the headlights. I didn't really respond to it. But it always stands out because I just think, where was that question coming from? It was coming because I was different. To be walking into that office. And he
probably wanted to be performative in front of a group. And
And it's I get it. That's, there's a lot of bro culture in commercial real estate. It's kind of embedded. I don't necessarily think it was entirely mean-spirited, but it was showing, the bias underneath.
It didn't make you feel good.
It did not make me feel welcome. No, not at all. So that's those are some of the challenges. In terms of solutions, I think it's a common one. I don't think this will be something no one else has said, but just connecting with other women and having a group that you can run things by, and even just people to point out that it is gender that's impacting your experience.
Yeah, to validate you.
To validate you. Because it's easy to forget sometimes, especially when things are going well. And it's being a consultant, it's I've got a client here, I've got a client there, I'm happy. I'm not necessarily going to apply that lens all the time, but I am lucky to have a lot of friends in the industry in various roles, and whenever we catch up and talk, I just feel so validated, and I hope they feel the same.
Well, honestly, too, I think part of it is, and this is just my perspective, guys have that too.
Yes.
Right? You don't even have to bring up anything to do with gender dynamics or even age dynamics, whatever makes group different from other group or whatever, or relates you to those people that you're friends with.
Yeah.
It's a shared life experience. And, you know, in a male-dominated industry, it is hard sometimes when there isn't that shared life experience to bridge gaps. I think it's improving for sure, and especially because spaces like this exist to support each other, to support fellow women in the industry. You know, the more conversations are had about it, the easier it is to go, oh, actually, that is a subconscious thing I didn't think of. Let me reconsider.
Yes.
I hope that guy today would not say that to you.
I hope so too. And maybe I have some faith, a small amount of faith.
Yeah, we'll have optimism, right?
Yeah, exactly. Optimism.
Optimism's the name of the game.
I'm a big believer in that because otherwise we just get dragged down by feeling like pessimistic. I like to know the facts and still maintain some level of hope.
Absolutely.
And I do find today, you know, it's interesting because I do think men more than women in commercial real estate tend to think of marketing as a bit of a support function and not necessarily a visionary function. And I'm a consultant, and I do some like fractional chief content officer type work. I'm really coming in to be visionary. And so I need other women to chat with to remind me that I'm coming there to push back sometimes. If someone is treating marketing like a support function or treating me like I'm a support function as a consultant, and they may not, like, I'm there to bring ideas to an organization that I'm not inside of. Yeah. And so I can't really do my job well if I don't push back when something isn't going to serve the brand's goals.
Absolutely. And what do you do when you encounter those situations, right? I'm sure you have a toolkit of ways to respond, but, you know, as a consultant with your own business, you get to be a little choosy, I'm sure, with the projects you take on. So how do you usually handle that? Because I think there are some, you know, businesses that are just getting started that are consulting, and maybe they don't have the luxury of getting to say no as much.
Right.
So I'm curious what you do, and then what advice would you give those people?
That's a great question. Yeah, I would say there's a few different levers to pull. One is you just got to give it a try. It's like I'm still learning how to do it in terms of in the moment. But as a person who's obsessed with research and data, I love to come back with data. Yeah. Sometimes that means I'm not responding with everything I have in the moment because I want to go back and check some stats and make an argument, maybe even make a presentation and say, here is why this old way that you want us to keep doing isn't working. Here's how much revenue it's brought in, 0. You know, it's
so there.
And here are some case studies of, you know, taking a different path or some data from, you know, anonymized data from other clients that I can bring to the table. It's not easy to pull that stuff up in memory in the moment. Sometimes it just takes realizing. There was a negotiations panel today that was so amazing, and a lot of the women were talking about just taking a beat is a great negotiation tool, whether that's saying, you know, I want to talk about this more, but let's do that later. Yeah. Or just pausing for a few seconds. And for me, sometimes a few seconds brings to mind the you know, maybe not the exact data point, but something that is a fact that I can bring in and show, like, this is why I think the strategy should be this way. Yeah. I think trying to think of some other tools in the toolkit. I'm very lucky in that a lot of the client relationships I have, there is an ally of some sort that is between me and perhaps the people that might discount marketing's role.
That might not have as much buy-in.
Exactly. Yeah. So they're helping get the buy-in for themselves and what function they oversee, but they're also helping do it for me and make the case for bringing on a consultant. So those allyships, you know, in terms of giving advice to other people, I would say definitely, you know, take people out to coffee, ask them questions, just make friends, especially with other women, because I didn't necessarily go into commercial real estate marketing thinking I would start my own company. I've always been pretty entrepreneurial, but I didn't necessarily see the road.
Sure.
I just knew I wanted to get started in marketing and that I had a lot to learn, and I wanted to do that inside of an organization. But a lot of my best allies are people that I've worked with in the past. So it just takes some time.
And
to
mentors.
build. And mentors,
Yeah,
yes.
people to learn from. Absolutely.
100%. And I am lucky in that way that there's been a lot of female mentors that have, you know, if not guided me through something specific, they've just been a big supporter. You know, they've been big supporters of me and my work and the value of content marketing in general throughout my career.
Absolutely. Ugh, such good stuff. Hannah, I want to be mindful of your time because there's still a lot of conference left to get to. We have a fancy dinner tonight. Got to get dressed. I definitely want to have you on the Crexi Podcast proper so we can have a longer conversation.
I would love that.
But before I let you go, any parting words of advice that you have for people doing marketing in commercial real estate, either trying to get better at storytelling, maybe starting their own business? How do you think, just any words of advice that you want to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, I'll leave you with something that's just top of mind. It's basically, you know, someone said in an earlier panel on capital markets, stay in the mix until 26. And she was talking about deal financing, but it applies so strongly to marketing. And I think, unfortunately, marketing constantly has to justify its existence. But what we know from the last recession was that the companies that stopped marketing themselves during that time or didn't do so effectively, a lot of them folded because a lot of times, especially if you're talking about services businesses, there's 3 competitors that you probably have 2 competitors. And if you're not top of mind when someone's narrowing down that list of who they're going to reach out to, you know, you might lose some business when things pick up. So get ready for 25, get ready for 26 is a good thing to bring to whoever your powers that be are.
Yes.
Whether that's,
great,
you know, the business
way to advocate
function.
for it.
Yes. And just know that really does make a difference. And it's probably easy to put a deck together that shows that using experiences from other companies that folded after doing no marketing.
Yeah, absolutely. Hannah, thank you so much for joining us today. Really, really appreciate this conversation. I had a lot of fun. We'll keep chatting after the mics go off, I'm sure.
I would love that. And thank you so much for having me. This was an honor.
Yeah, where can people get in touch with you if they want to connect, follow you on social media?
Yes, Hannah Miet on LinkedIn. Last name is Miet. And Hannah at hannahmiet.net if you want to shoot me an email.
Amazing. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone who tuned in today. If you enjoyed this episode, do not miss the next one. Visit crexi.com/podcast and sign up to get the next email delivered or the next podcast delivered straight to your inbox. You can also subscribe to the Crexi Podcast on your favorite podcast app or check out our YouTube channel for video recordings of each episode. Take care and be sure to tune in next time.